My daughter texted me, "We need Spax." And I know that line sounds harsh, but it's exactly what went through my mind when I read those words. Maybe you're already asking yourself, how could a daughter say something so cold to her own mother? That's the very question that haunted me as I sat in my quiet apartment staring at my phone screen in disbelief. My name is Helen. I'm 67 years old and I've been a widow for 5 years now. My husband Richard passed away suddenly, leaving me with both a broken heart and a very comfortable nest egg. He had worked hard his entire life to make sure I'd never have to struggle financially. I thought that security would keep our family close, that it would be the glue holding us together. I never imagined I have one daughter, Melissa. She's married to Daniel, a man who talks a lot about ambition, but seems allergic to the idea of working hard. Together, they've built a picture-perfect suburban life, the big house in Connecticut, 2 shiny SUVs in the driveway, their children enrolled in an elite private school, vacations to Europe every summer, ski trips in the winter, endless renovations to their dream home. From the outside looking in, you'd think Melissa and Daniel had it all. But here's the truth. Most people never saw every piece of that dream life was funded by me. The house, my checkbook, the tuition, my transfers, the luxury vacations, my generosity. Even the handbags Melissa liked to parade around at family gatherings, those were courtesy of my late husband's savings funneled through me. At first I told myself it was what any mother would do. Richard and I had always wanted Melissa to feel secure, to never worry the way we once did when we were young. But somewhere along the way, my role shifted. I wasn't Helen, the mother who baked cookies and listened to childhood worries. I became Helen, the provider, the safety net, the silent sponsor of their lifestyle. And the worst part, I let it happen. For the first 5 years after Richard's death, I opened my wallet for Melissa and Daniel at every turn. When Melissa divorced her first husband, I covered the legal fees. When she married Daniel, I paid for their entire honeymoon in Italy. When they couldn't quite scrape together the down payment for their sprawling house in Connecticut, I wrote a check for $250,000 as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Month after month, I sent additional money to cover unexpected expenses. Sometimes it was the children's summer camp, sometimes another renovation, sometimes just Daniel's business setbacks. I never asked too many questions. I wanted to believe I was helping them build stability. I wanted to believe I was keeping our family close the way Richard always dreamed we would be. Each transfer felt like proof of my devotion. That's how I justified it. I wasn't just giving money, I was giving love. I told myself this is what a good mother does. She sacrifices so her children can thrive. I thought if I just gave enough, if I just supported enough, they would always remember how deeply I cared. But devotion can blind you. The breaking point came on my 67th birthday. I decided to keep the tradition Richard and I had started decades earlier, baking a homemade chocolate cake. It was his recipe, one he perfected in our tiny kitchen long before we could afford store-bought luxuries. Every year since Melissa was a little girl, that cake had been her favorite. I spent hours in my kitchen that morning, measuring sugar and cocoa with arthritic hands that don't move as quickly as they once did. The smell of chocolate filled the air, and for a moment I felt like Richard was there beside me. I texted Melissa, letting her know the cake was ready whenever she wanted to come by. And then I waited. I kept glancing out the window, expecting to see her car pull up. I checked my phone every time it buzzed, hoping it was her calling to say she was on her way. But the hours stretched into the afternoon into evening, and then the evening into another sleepless night. The cake sat untouched on my counter for 3 full days. By the 4th, it had gone stale. I stood there in my kitchen, scraping Richard's recipe into the trash, my chest tight with something I couldn't name, grief, disappointment, maybe both. On that 4th day, my phone buzzed at last. It was Melissa. For a split second, my heart leapt with hope. Maybe she was finally calling to say she was sorry, to say she missed me. Instead, it was a single text message, "Happy late birthday, Mom. You should have reminded me." You should have reminded her. As though it were my job to make sure my own daughter remembered the day she came into this world. As though my existence was a calendar notification she could easily swipe away. I read that message again and again, each time feeling something in me harden. All those years of checks, transfers, sacrifices, I thought they were investments in love, in family, in loyalty. Instead, they had turned me into background noise, a convenience, a resource to be tapped when needed, and ignored the rest of the time. In that single moment, my role shifted once more. I wasn't just the provider. I was the fool who had mistaken exploitation for affection. And for the first time in years, I felt the sting of betrayal sharper than any grief. After Melissa's text, something inside me finally snapped. For decades, I had played the part of the generous mother, the safety net, the one who never said no. But that woman, the one who excused every slight and soothed every wound with money, she was gone. The very next morning, I called James, our longtime family attorney. My voice was steady in a way that surprised even me. "James," I said, "I want all automatic transfers to Melissa," and Daniel stopped immediately. He hesitated, knowing just how much money had been flowing out of my accounts each month. But within a day, the faucet was turned off. The silence didn't last long. 6 days later, my phone lit up like a fire alarm. Melissa called over and over. Daniel left frantic voicemails, their numbers stacked in my missed calls like a desperate countdown. At first, the messages were polite. "Mom, I think there's been a bank error. Can you call me back?" By the 10th message, the tone had shifted. "Mom, please, we need you to fix this." The mortgage bounced, the tuition check bounced. By the 20th, panic had set in. "This isn't funny anymore. We need that money." One morning, the pounding on my apartment door woke me before dawn. Through the peephole, I saw Melissa pacing Daniel, clutching his phone like a weapon. I opened the door calmly, even offered them coffee, which only seemed to make them angrier. "Why would you cut off our money without warning?" Melissa demanded. "Our money?" I repeated softly. "That's interesting, considering it was mine to begin with." I led them into the living room and opened a folder I had prepared. Inside were 5 years of records, bank transfers, checks, gifts. "In the 5 years since your father passed, I've given your family $847,000 in direct payments," I said. "That doesn't include the down payment, the vacations, or the holidays. Nearly $1 million, Melissa. Do you know how many times you've called to ask how I was doing? 7. Do you know how many times you've called asking for money? 43. The room went silent. Daniel's face flushed. Melissa looked everywhere but at me. I took a deep breath. "Here's what's going to happen. You have 30 days. 30 days to prove that I matter to you as more than a bank account. Not through frantic calls when bills are due, not through fake smiles. Real effort, real care. Otherwise, this conversation ends permanently." They nodded quickly, but I could already see calculation flickering in their eyes. The very next day, Melissa called with syrup in her voice. "Hi, Mom, just wanted to see how you're feeling today." Daniel followed with his own attempt, suggesting we go out for dinner, just the 3 of us, like old times. Flowers arrived at my door with a note declaring how much they appreciated me. My granddaughter Emma phoned, stumbling through a rehearsed story about her school day. Even little Jacob sent me a carefully written letter, the handwriting far too neat to be his own. At first I wanted to believe, but as the days stretched on, the pattern became too obvious. Their words were polished, their gestures extravagant, but none of it felt real. It wasn't love, it was theater. And then the final blow over lunch, a close friend confided that Melissa had been telling people at the country club that I was losing touch, that my financial decisions were unstable. Rumor had it they were already looking into legal guardianship over my assets. So while Melissa was sending roses to my doorstep, she was also planting seeds to have me declared incompetent. That wasn't love or even desperation, it was betrayal of the cruelest kind. When I learned Melissa had been whispering about my supposed mental decline, I didn't waste a single day. If they wanted to paint me as unstable, I would arm myself with the truth. I scheduled a full psychological evaluation with one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Manhattan. Hours of testing questions, memory exercises, logical reasoning. At the end, I received what I already knew, a clean bill of health. I was perfectly competent, fully capable of making my own financial decisions. But I wasn't finished. Through my attorney, I contacted a private investigator named Patricia Chen. I wanted everything, every debt, every hidden account, every secret they had tried to bury. Within a week, Patricia handed me a thick file. What I read made my stomach turn. Melissa and Daniel were drowning in debt, maxed out credit cards, overdue loans, a second mortgage. They had created a secret bank account where my money was funneled before being withdrawn almost immediately. And the most damning evidence, drafts of legal documents they had been working on for years, paperwork to establish guardianship over me and seize control of my estate. It was clear now this wasn't about temporary desperation. It was a calculated plan that had started right after Richard's funeral, when I was most vulnerable. For 5 years, they had been preparing to rob me of my autonomy. I decided it was time for my own performance. That Friday evening, Melissa invited me to dinner. The table was set with their finest china candles, flickering like we were in some magazine spread. They smiled too wide, asked about my health, laughed at every small story I told. My grandchildren looked confused, as if they'd been rehearsed for a role they didn't quite understand. I waited until dessert, then placed 2 documents on the table, my psychological evaluation and Patricia's investigation report. Melissa's smile faltered. Daniel's face went pale. I know everything I said, my voice steady. The hidden account, the debts, the guardianship, paperwork. You've been setting me up for years. Mom, it's not what it looks like, Melissa stammered. Really, I leaned closer. Because it looks exactly like elder abuse. It looks like fraud. And it looks like betrayal of the cruelest kind. The room went silent except for the sound of Emma shifting uncomfortably in her chair. My grandchildren's wide eyes darted between their parents and me, struggling to make sense of the confrontation. I straightened my back. Here is what will happen. You will move out of this house, the house I bought, within 30 days. If you attempt to interfere with me again, if you continue to slander my name, I will not hesitate to file criminal charges. My lawyer assures me I have more than enough evidence to put both of you in court. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Daniel sat frozen, his knuckles white around his wine glass. And one more thing, I added, standing to leave. I've rewritten my will. Every dollar of the $50 million your father and I worked for will now go to a foundation supporting women's charities. You've lost everything you thought you could steal. I picked up my purse, gave my grandchildren a small, reassuring smile, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could feel the weight of their silence, the silence of people who realized their game was over. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. Not because of money, but because I had finally reclaimed myself. As I walked out of Melissa's house that night, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by guilt or obligation. I wasn't second-guessing whether I had done enough or given enough. I felt lighter, free even. The air outside was crisp, and for once I could breathe without the heaviness of being used. I realized that freedom doesn't come from money or even from security. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone, even your own family, diminish it. That night, I promised myself I would never again confuse generosity with love. I had spent years pouring myself out, believing that if I just gave more, my daughter would give me respect in return. But here's the truth. I had to learn the hard way. Kindness without boundaries becomes a leash that others will use to pull you around. Family ties don't mean endless withdrawals from your soul or your bank account. Real love is built on mutual respect. Without respect, even the closest relationships collapse into transactions. I want every woman listening to me, especially those of you over 45 who have spent your lives sacrificing for everyone else, to hear this clearly. Your value is not measured by what you give away. You deserve love, care, and dignity, simply for being who you are. If my story does anything, I hope it reminds you that you are worthy of more than being treated like an endless resource. You are not alone if you've felt taken for granted. Too many of us have lived that reality, but it doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. Thank you for staying with me through my journey. If parts of this story echo your own life, I would love to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters, and it may give strength to another woman who needs it today. If you found something meaningful here, please share this video with a friend who might need the reminder too. And don't forget to follow Real Her Stories for more powerful journeys like this one, because our stories matter, and so do we.